Okay, excellent. It looks like the trickle is slowing down. Good evening, everyone. My name is Johannes Urpelainen. I'm the founding director of the Initiative for Sustainable Energy Policy and a professor here at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Today, we are very delighted to present to you a webinar on the just transition issues in India's coal mining sector. We have two excellent speakers. We have Setu Peltz, who is a PhD candidate at the Rainer Lemoine Institute in Berlin, Germany, who's done extensive research on energy access, energy policy, and just transition issues. And we have Shrestha Banerjee, who is leading the climate policy and natural resource work at the International Forum on, let me see if I get this right, Environment, Sustainability and Technology, or I4S, in New Delhi, India. It's a very exciting new initiative with which ISEP is partnering on a number of programs. So what we are going to do today is I'm just first going to ask the speakers to give their remarks, and then we are going to have some time for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A box, and I will then moderate the discussion. For more information about the work that we do at ISEP, please do check out our website. It's size-isep.org. I'm putting the link into the chat box. And with Setu, we have written a policy brief on these just transition issues. I'm also including the link there if you want to read sort of for more detail on what we found when we studied these issues. And so with that, I would like to invite Setu to give us a presentation on his research.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Professor Urpelainen. I'll just set this up. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Setu Peltz, and together with Shrestha Banerjee today, we will speak with you about our work looking at economic uncertainties and a just transition for India's coal mining sector. To begin the webinar, we'll just get an overview of what's actually happening with coal production and consumption in India. As you can see with this chart, coal has been an important resource for economic growth in India, and consumption has increased from 460 million tons in 2008, on the left of the chart, to almost 900 million tons in 2018. At the same time, you'll notice the divergence between the two bars, and this indicates the deficit in local coal production, which has led to India importing almost 200 million tons of coal annually over the past 5 years. We'll now move on to how coal is actually used in India. And this table describes the consumption of domestically produced coal in India in million tons. As you can see on the right of the table, 576 million tons, or approximately 85% of the domestically produced coal, was consumed by thermal power plants for power generation. And thermal power generation is therefore by far the most dominant consumer of coal in India. With this in mind, we now consider trends in the thermal power generation sector. The government is optimistic about power demand growth, and recent plans suggest this requires a doubling of generation capacity from 344 gigawatts to 619 gigawatts between 2017 and 2027. Thermal power generation is planned to increase as well, but not as fast as renewable energies, through mainly ground mount, and this difference in relative share between 2017 and 2027, or this drop, is mainly through increasing renewables, mainly through ground-mounted solar. With these plans in mind, we should have a look at what's happening with the existing fleet. Average thermal power plant generation load factors peaked at 80% in 2009 and have dropped to 61% in 2018. And clearly this is an aggregate number and may mask differences between older and newer plants in the fleet. But it's noticeable that despite increasing coal consumption, the plant load factors have actually dropped in the past 10 years. In parallel to these trends, recent tenders show that ground-mounted solar is bidding at 2.5 Indian rupees per kilowatt hour. This is not just competitive against new coal power plants, but also against a sizable portion of the existing fleet. We now turn to trends in electricity demand in India. Pre-COVID modeling by Indian researchers suggested that the demand would grow at a compound annual growth rate year on year between 5.4 and 7.4% between 2015 and 2030. In these models, the industrial and residential sectors were projected to be the largest consumers of electricity in 2030. Now, while demand will most certainly continue to increase over the next 15 years, the rate of this increase is now very uncertain in a post-COVID global economy. And these uncertainties are troubling for thermal power plant generation due to the must-run regulations for renewable energy in India. So a mismatch between demand and generation of electricity will most likely result in lower plant load factors and cause issues with stranded assets and financial difficulties for the thermal power fleet. And we can now take a broader look at the trends in the coal mining sector in India. The government of India recently enacted the Mineral Laws Amendment Act, and this basically opens up the coal blocks for private sector investors across India. Now, this reflects a shift towards maximizing local coal production and reducing the deficit and the imports of coal, and the overall policy goal of self-reliance in India. But the coal auctions face several uncertainties, such as state-level pushback that was recently in the news, as well as environmental concerns in the heavily forested coal blocks, for example, in Chhattisgarh. So it's unclear whether firms, other than the traditional operators of these coal blocks, which are public sector undertakings, will be willing and able to navigate and secure the necessary permits to exploit these resources. Furthermore, the typical lead time of between 3 to 4 years between auction and coal production will factor heavily into risk assessments as the economic slowdown and the uncertainties really take hold. So what does this mean for jobs in the coal mining sector in coal belt states? Well, even without these uncertainties, formal employment at Coal India Limited is steadily dropping, and it's driven largely by productivity increases in coal mining in India. As you can see in this chart, the number of formal Coal India Limited employees in 2007 was around 450,000 people, which dropped to just below 300,000 last year in 2019. Now, coal mining productivity in India remains approximately half that of the global average. So this suggests that this drop in formal employment is most likely to continue at Coal India Limited. Now, the coal sector does not just provide formal jobs. Millions of households across coal belt states are also dependent on things like contract coal mining labor, which is daily labor working for companies that are contracted by CIL, or Coal India Limited, to conduct mining operations across the country. They're also dependent on secondary and tertiary industries, which can range from things like freight and transport of coal through to services for coal workers in these rural areas. Furthermore, a large part of the population is dependent on subsistence coal mining, which is oftentimes illegal small-scale coal mining that's done directly in the coal fields and transported straight to markets using bicycles for sale. Now, in these sectors, there's little to no job security, and they're much less likely to be unionized and have any kind of protections if they were to lose their jobs or be injured or fall unwell. However, it's still very challenging for us to actually describe employment trends in these sectors due to data gaps, and my co-presenter Shrestha will talk about this in more detail shortly. Now, the coal sector uncertainty is just sort of one of the many challenges facing these coal belt states. Unorganized employment continues to represent the vast majority of total employment in coal belt states. And these were also the jobs most severely hit by the COVID-19 shock, which really highlights the vulnerability when the workforce is dependent on unorganized employment. Now, at the same time as this challenge with unorganized employment, new labor market entrants in coal belt states are estimated to total to 45 million by 2030. So with these facts in mind, the unorganized employment, or rather underemployment, and this incredible growth in the labor market in coal belt states, our understanding is that decent jobs are needed for millions more than those currently reliant on some way on the coal sector. So while coal mining is still or the coal sector is an incredibly important employer in the coal belt states, policy intervention must also consider future labor market entrants when developing suitable alternatives. So we now turn to employment trends in coal belt states, and this figure shows the share of overall employment as it stands between public and private sector across a selection of states, including coal belt states. So you can compare Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha with Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Gujarat. As you can see, public sector employment dominates in coal belt states. At the same time, we see decades of resource rent dependence in state budgets. These two factors combined mean that development of alternative livelihoods and of diversification of the economy in these coal belt states is incredibly challenging, and the state governments really have their work cut out for them if they are to diversify their economy away from coal. At the same time, this really suggests that the national government must step up and provide support to these states to really make this happen. Finally, we look at what the central government is doing in terms of supporting the energy sector. So here we see a table showing the total central government support and subsidies in rupee crore between 2014 and 2019. And you can see that coal production subsidies in bold were stable over the past 5 years, whereas renewable energy subsidies were relatively volatile, but are expected to rise again with the ambitious targets the government has set for expanding out renewables between now and 2030. Overall, what this table shows us is that fossil fuels continue to enjoy strong national government support across India. So with this overview, we developed a set of broader policy recommendations. And basically, to summarize the first half of the webinar, the coal sector in India is facing several uncertainties, and thermal power plants already under financial strain face a bleak short-term outlook. Coupled with the problem of air pollution and of climate change, this will most likely put downward pressure on coal jobs, both formal and informal, in coal belt states. At the same time as this is happening, coal belt states need support to create jobs and livelihoods for a growing population, as well as those currently dependent on coal. So we propose sort of 3 broad policy recommendations. I'll go through them now. The first is the design of a green stimulus program that gradually shifts the finance away from coal value chain towards renewable energies and, importantly, new industries. So here we see that micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, are a key mechanism for job creation in rural areas and require further support. At the same time, longer-term sustainable growth requires the identification of new and promising sectors through analysis of state-specific industrial and services sector development opportunities and a skills mapping of the population. Furthermore, we recommend the use of public sector undertakings to create job opportunities in coal-dependent states. So PSUs are controlled by the government, and they can take a more holistic and nuanced approach to a just transition than their private sector counterparts. An example here could be a PSU-led procurement program aimed at MSMEs in coal belt states with a simple and fast formalization and bidding process that creates MSME growth and jobs in these rural areas. Finally, we recommend that a regional hub strategy is embraced to enable job creation and regional economic development in coal-dependent states. Now, regional hubs could help and enable MSMEs to join supply chains, join national supply chains, and provide goods and services to larger companies, including PSUs, as we just mentioned. Although rural-urban migration right now is almost unimaginable as COVID-19 continues to spread, in the midterm, coal-dependent states should encourage rural households to send workers to regional hubs with sufficient commerce and industry to provide decent job opportunities. Now, these are quite broad policy recommendations and require a detailed and nuanced understanding of the distinct context and challenges at district level if they are to be translated to effective action on the ground. So to take us through what this looks like, I will hand over now to Shrestha to talk with us about opportunities for a just transition in coal belt states in more detail. Over to you, Shrestha.
Thank you, Setu. Thanks for a very informative overview and actually a status of what is with the coal mining states and the areas. And thanks, Johannes, for this invitation to be part of this webinar, which I feel is a very timely one when we are going through a pandemic, unprecedented times in terms of job and economic uncertainties, and as well as we have the climate crisis. I mean, every day we are seeing in the television what is going on in California and in Oregon. So I believe that it comes at a very, very time when we are visualizing the severity of these situations ourselves. So in my more specifically talk of the realities of the coal mining areas, and in that context I will try to have an understanding or provide an understanding of what might a just transition or a fossil fuel transition entail in the context of India's coal mining areas. And Setu will lead the slides, and so I might have to interrupt sometimes for directions, but that's how we'll go about it. Thanks, Setu. Please, the next one. So when we talk of the classic problem, what is the situation of our coal-bearing areas in India? The first picture that comes to anyone's mind when we go to these coal mining regions is the classic problem of what we call is a resource curse. Basically, the situation is that these regions have a lot of mineral wealth. They have rich forest lands. They had very, very important water bodies, like entire coal belt in Jharkhand is around the Damodar River. But at the same time, and they have been the engines of growth in our country in many ways. They have contributed. But what has not happened in this region over the years the problem is that the human development conditions in these regions, or HDIs, have been extremely poor over the years, and the situation really has changed much over the years, though in some indicators it has been improving. And at the same time, there is extreme poverty in terms of income. Given the situation, actually, a long back, my colleagues did a book which they called Rich Land, Poor People, and that situation, unfortunately, has not changed much. If we look at two very recent statistics I have put up through maps, these are the blue one where it is highlighted. These are highlighting the top. Here are 22 coal mining districts of India, which are currently producing more than 10 million tons of coal per year. And for some of the districts like Korba, it is actually 130 million tons. So it's you can imagine how huge it is, the mining activities going on. And they are spread across about 9 to 10 states. But if we look at the human development status in these districts particularly, and I looked into the multidimensional poverty index, which is currently being used in place of HDI. More than 50% of the people in most of these areas are multidimensionally poor, which is an extremely, it's an extremely alarming situation. And what do we mean by multidimensionally poor in very simple terms is, there is a very poor status of education, there is a very, very poor status of healthcare and healthcare access, as well as access to basic amenities which define your living standards, such as clean drinking water, clean cooking fuel, sanitation, etc. Now, and actually in these areas, this multidimensional poverty it's twice the average of India. So it really gives a very stark situation. At the same time, if we look into the income component of these regions, and most of these coal mining regions in these districts are in rural areas, barring some places like Dhanbad of Jharkhand or Jharsuguda districts of Odisha. Most of these coal mining areas are in rural parts. And if we look into the rural income of these districts, in the majority of these districts, 85% or more households actually have an income between rupees 5,000 to rupees 10,000 per month, and actually more more are on the lower side of it. Now, what this essentially means is our ground research over the years show that on an average, this household size are 6 to 7 members. So if I take, so the per person per month income per capita, if I think it's as low as 1,000 or more. So it's a very, very stark situation. If we look into the state minimum wage rate, actually these families are earning lower than the state minimum wage per month if we take the 5,000 mark. So this is the situation of human development and poverty. Say to the next one. Now, if I specifically zoom into because we are talking of coal in the complex, what is the status of the coal mining workforce? What Setu has pointed out very correctly is that these areas are hugely dependent on informal workforce. And over the years, the CIL employment, CIL is the biggest coal producing company in India, actually produces the majority of coal, 80% or more, and the subsidiaries. And this huge amount of informal workforce is actually nearly 3 times currently in most districts if we compare it to the formal workforce. So, and this is a very broad statistics, because what constitutes an informal workforce is a mixed bowl. It ranges from people who are driving, who are drivers in these areas, who are workers, who are laborers, who are picking coal. It's a huge, who are stacking coal. So it's a complex mix, and there is no inventory of these people essentially. Some are there, but for majority it is not. If we look into the socioeconomic status of this category of people, what comes out very clear is a majority of them actually are casual laborers or daily wagers, or a classic case, if we go to the legacy coal mining areas, is coal pickers and sellers. So these people generally pick up coal, put them in a sack and sell it off to the local market. So basically, it's a very, very diffuse set of employment. People just sit near the coal mines by the day to get some sort of work. If it comes along 2 days, 3 days, it's really very uncertain. Our survey across some of the districts in Jharkhand and earlier in Korba had suggested that the average earning of these people, again, they fall within the lowest income bracket of rupees 5,000 to 10,000 per month, more earning on the lower side of it. What has happened over these years also in these areas, which correlates to actually the CIL falling employment trend, is that mechanization is happening over the years in these areas with respect to coal mining. At the same time, if we go to coal mining areas, actually CIL or its subsidiaries no more operate there in many areas. It has been, most of the coal mining activities have been outsourced to private contractors, like if you from overburden management, dumps, or even mining activities or various other things. What essentially it has led to is a distortion of the local labor market and the wage. And I say it's a race to the bottom it has become. So basically, people with no opportunities in this area, because it's a very coal-centric economies, people have no option but to actually agree to these negotiations, which are very, very low. What Setu has rightly also pointed out, that this informal workforce are not unionized. And I had talked to labor unions in Jharkhand, in Chhattisgarh, in the top mining districts, and actually the union exists and all the bargaining power exists for the formal coal workforce, which actually are better off in terms of income, in terms of pension benefits, in terms of healthcare and all other aspects. So these people are just left nowhere in the lurch. And the way it was negotiated, and I reviewed some of the incomes that these people were getting, it's in fact half of the state minimum wage. So that's a very, very, really a poor situation. Some people are earning only rupees 3,000 per month and then can barely support a family. What adds to the problem is that these people they do not have much option to look out for alternatives. Because one, these regions are very coal economy dependent. And the second reason is also that their education levels are very poor as well as their skill sets. Now, if we look into the education indicator of these areas, what comes out very clearly that till class 8, people are studying 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th standards. But as they go up, there is need of more hands, and there is a high level of dropout. Beyond class 8, it is a sharp drop of 25%, and as you go higher, there is more and more drop. Our interaction on ground, and we did an extensive household survey for a related study in Jharkhand, which was showing that people do not have any other skills also, so they don't know what else to do when we asked them. So this is the problem. The next one. So then what is the way ahead for the coal mining regions? And I feel that the government is currently talking about opening up more than 40 coal blocks in the heart belt of India. And maybe that's not the solution, because clearly coal has not resolved the economic distress for the majority of people in these areas. It has definitely improved the lives of some people who have been formally employed or the businesses, but for a vast majority, no. At the same time, we have a climate crisis where we cannot just afford to open up coal blocks, because coal is becoming economically non-viable in many ways, given the competitiveness. So the time is, and India has not, discussion is much taking in place right now, but India being a key player in the climate change action, we feel that it is the time really we must start discussions around this. And there are 3 opportunities clearly in hand. The first one is, of course, the renewable energy, which is the most discussed topic, and we have very, very significant statistics to show the opportunity. The second thing is the legacy problem of environmental and social costs in the coal-bearing areas. And by no chance this is going to go down, even with the best intentions. Because because the forest land cannot be restored in their own way. The water bodies have been polluted, groundwater resources have been depleting, and it's just a cumulative impact. So environmental costs will grow. What extent it will grow can be debated, but it will grow. And there have been huge social costs, because we do open cast coal mining in India, and it leads to livelihood loss, it leads to migration, it leads to people's displacement, and resettlement is really a challenge. Rather, I feel that we should take this opportunity of just transition to actually reverse the resource curse that has been there in these regions over the century, actually, over 100 years now. So, and just transition by definition itself, in the scholarly research that we have around it, is not a question of environment versus job. Actually, it's a win-win for the environment as well as the economy. And I believe going forward from a policy point, that's where is the opportunity for the just transition discourse in India. So the first thing, Setu pointed about the macroeconomic opportunities that lie in hand, or what the government must do. I would therefore focus some of the microeconomic opportunities that we can consider. Number one is improving livelihood opportunities and income security of the informal workforce. And here's the challenge, because substitution of jobs for the formal workforce is much easy, because you have an inventory. You can list who are they, but this is the people no one knows. They are not inventoried. There's no register. So the best way is to create a regional economic development plan or a district plan, so that essentially no one falls through the cracks. So that's why I say we need to build strong economic base, considering the local resource potential and skills. And this is very important, because a lot of the people we talk of skill training, we talk of alternative industries, but many of them are intimidated, but to what extent they can be trained. And training has remained a problem because you train, but people don't get jobs. So the best way is to create an environment where they're most comfortable. A little bit of skill training can help them to get a decent income. And building around the natural resource potential is important because it's sustainable as well as it's secure. It is less vulnerable to social and economic disruptions like what we saw with COVID. And very surprisingly, I mean, with all the forest land diversion that happens in coal regions, in some of the districts, there is an opportunity to develop forest-based livelihoods in these regions. And if we look particularly all the top coal mining districts of Chhattisgarh or Singrauli district of MP or Siddhi, or even Odisha, Angul and Sundargarh, and unfortunately only one Jharkhand district has much forest land, which is Chhatra, but it has the biggest coal mines in Asia right now. There is about 40 to 50% forest cover in these districts as compared to the total geographical area. So it is quite an opportunity. It is a poorly tapped opportunity, but it can definitely be tapped if there is the right political will behind it. Next. And the good thing about it is to tap the agricultural potential or to tap the natural resource base. The government really does not have to come up with any new policies and programs. All we need is a better implementation of some of the fantastic laws that India already has in hand. Number one is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. I mean, right now it is one of the most talked about laws in India to tackle with the migrant crisis and labor crisis that has followed the COVID situation. And NREGA is employment, guarantees your minimum wage, but what the fantastic thing NREGA offers is most of the work is about sustainable resource development, like watershed development activities, natural resource management. So essentially it has a double benefit. It can create jobs as well as it can restore these regions and improve their resource potential. The second one I would say is the Forest Right Act. This is a fantastic law which essentially not only creates livelihood opportunities of forest dependent people, but makes them independent. And today we are talking in India and world, there is a popular term going on, which is Atmanirbhar, which is self-reliance. And there can be no better way to make people self-reliant if we can enact this act, properly implement this act. Then we have two very important schemes which are tied to this. One is the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sanchay Yojana, and it's a Indian name in Hindi, which essentially is for watershed development and micro irrigation. Considering that these coal mining areas has a real problem with water resources, this is a very important program, and it is an integrated program. The last one, and there are many more, but one more important I would just say is the National Rural Livelihood Mission, which basically talks about women livelihood and women developing women, empowering women to have secure their own income. And women employment is very critical. We have gender issues in the coal mining regions, and going ahead, we really need more women participation in the workforce. But I feel income is only one component, and other major component is the social infrastructure. Because as we saw that there is very poor situation with various human development indicators. We have the multiple poverty index is very high in these regions, and we really need to invest in building human capital, such as through investments in healthcare, through education, and of course through nutrition. I mean, we need a healthy workforce and an educated workforce. So what essentially I would sum up combining these two is for India's coal-bearing areas, when we want to think of moving away from the coal economy or start thinking of a transition, it won't happen overnight. But if the planning must start, it must take into account the plan of a socio-economic transition, because we need to improve income. We need to improve the social indicators of this region, because income cannot substitute for everything. You need to have this state support for various things. And we need a regional plan, as I said, because we do not have the inventory for a majority of the coal workforce, and we must ensure that no one falls through the cracks. Next one. Now, where will the money come from? And this is I believe this is one of the big challenges, in fact, worldwide. Like, where will the just transition money come from? The the idea is great. And money is actually on often the major drawbacks of why most programs don't get implemented. Now, in India, we are still at the inception of this discussion. So, of course, the state and the central government, when we come up with any just transition policy or more political will to work towards this, have to work together to pull resources or to identify resources for just transition fund. But what we can start with, and this is another hot topic right now is being debated in India, is how to use the district mineral foundation funds. Now, I'll just say it very in a very short way. The district mineral foundation fund was actually created in 2015, looking at the poor income and human development status of the mining districts, including the coal mining districts. And the contribution towards these funds comes from the payment by mining companies operating in these districts till the time they operate, no matter what mineral. Now, today, and this is the latest statistics of the government, there are more than 40,000 crore Indian rupees in the DMF fund with the government. A major contribution of this comes from coal, more than 17,000 crore rupees. And if we look at, this is just the map of the top 5 coal states in India, and if we look in Jharkhand, the major share of DMF is in fact coming from coal. Jharkhand itself has more than 4,000 crore rupees coming in DMF just from coal. Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Telangana, it's all the same. So here lies the opportunity, and me and my colleagues have been working on this issue in the mining districts of the past few years. And if we break it down to a micro level, what essentially for some of the major mining districts translates to is for a particular one village can get about 1 crore rupees per month for development. It's a huge, huge number for one village. So the opportunity is huge. But the problem is that it has not been implemented well until now. But this can definitely be the beginning point. And I'll stop to that and can take more questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sadhu and Shrestha, for a really insightful and detailed presentation. I'm going to now moderate the Q&A. My connection seems a bit weak today, so if I get cut off, just go ahead and answer the question. Don't wait for me. You can see it in the Q&A box. We have lots there. And I would ask you to keep them short because we have little time and lots of interest. So the first questions are from Himanshu Upadhyaya, who's asking about what is a coal-dependent state and which percentage of their royalties, their budget actually comes from coal. So, Setu, could you give us a definition of a coal-dependent state?
I think it varies, but basically it's a state where we have extensive coal mining happening, and in terms of the percentage of state-owned resources or the state budgets, I understand that it's the order of around 10% in Jharkhand, for example. This is a good indicator of what we consider as a coal-dependent state.
Excellent. And what about, Setu and Shrestha, the mining royalties as a percentage of revenue for the state? Any?
Yeah, so it varies, Jonas, from state to state. But in some of the key coal states such as Jharkhand, actually mining royalty constitutes quite a significant proportion of the state budget. If I come to some of the districts, it constitutes about 20 to 25% of the district budget. So it's a quite a hefty revenue, and this is directly related to coal. But if you take other industries into account, because I believe coal mining alone doesn't, coal brings in other industries. So if we look at the mining and manufacturing together, it's quite a significant amount of GDP that coal has a share of. Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you. The next question is from Thomas Timberg. Very interesting question. So what should be the role of micro, small and medium enterprises in the value chain? So if you think of things like decentralized electricity generation, cold storage, things like this. So Setu, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think also Shrestha made a really good point that this really requires the skills mapping, and you must combine training with actual job opportunities. And from the work that we've been doing, for example, in rural India, we've really seen that micro, small and medium enterprises are the typical job job creators for rural populations. So there are the smaller shops in the rural towns and villages that provide services to the local population and provide jobs as well. And I think there's been an excellent report by the CEEW that really describes the value of MSMEs and the importance of supporting this sector to kind of revitalize the economy, or at least provide jobs, let's say, following the COVID pandemic.
And the other question is, I think this is also for Setu, though of course I welcome Shrestha's comment as well. So when you say that this kind of states are dominated by public undertakings, is that only in the formal sector? How would you think about the large kind of informal or unorganized economy in India?
I think I understand that public sector employment is formal employment. Shrestha, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is basically employment. That's just my understanding. So it really ranges across a variety of different sectors. Could be education, agriculture, industry. It's very it's in every almost every sector, and it's basically a government-led company that provides services or other things. Yeah.
And I have a quick comment on that. I think informal economy is very important in terms of jobs, because most people don't have formal jobs. But the challenge there is that the productivity of the informal economy is very low. So that's why the formal economy is so important as a kind of an engine of growth. The next question is from Rahul Tongia. And so he's asking about what if these sort of new schemes to reactivate and expand private mining happen, and there will be fewer imports? Any thoughts on how that would influence the kind of future of these states? Maybe Shrestha, you can take this one.
So, see, the point is there has been a lot of sentiment about private mining coming in, and the situation right now is, my first question is, I'm not sure that if we need to open coal blocks at this point, because what the ground situation suggests is people are opening coal blocks to, stop the import, basically to fulfill that. So the blocks where they can dig coal from, I'm not taking the official's name, but it was shared with us that we are not going to invest in old coal mines anymore. And so basically we need to produce a lot of coal in a quick time. And that's the reason the private investment is being opened up. Now, in terms of, if the question is about socioeconomic fallout, of course, if private investment will open up, it will increase coal production, no doubt. But what Setu pointed out is who is going to invest? That's a question definitely that remains. The second question is also if even private investment is brought in right now. Typically a coal block takes time to develop. We all know, like securing clearances and all. And if really we are looking at the target is to increase coal production through private investment in the next 4 to 5 years, I'm not sure how the new auction of coal blocks to private investors will help, because these coal blocks will not even come into production by that time. So that is something we really need to keep in mind, and the way RE is progressing, and I'm sure Rahul is quite skeptical at times about we need technology. There is a lot of issues with the grid, but still with all those issues, there are statistics that in the next 10 years, we might get about 45% of the electricity generation from RE. So if we stick to this situation, it really becomes, I think it's not a very win-win economic decision. In terms of social fallouts, I'll differ with a broad skepticism, because as I said, in the coal belts, actually the public sector is not working. It is already working under contractors. There is a situation where people are being arm twisted in terms of wages or benefits, and it is very clear. So the private investment, of course, can, but I don't think the public sector has really contributed to the overall economic well-being in these areas over the years, except for the Coal India employees. And the Coal India welfare policy, I was very recently reading it in very detail. It says that they'll only do it for their own employees. So it's very clear.
And thank you, Shrestha. Great answers. I think you also answered Ruben Umuna's first question, because he was asking about contract types. And I think the understanding here is that the formal public sector jobs are great if you can get them. They come with pensions and benefits, but they tend to be quite few. It's not a large number of jobs. And then the contractors and informal workers don't have access. They have much lower salaries, and they don't actually have salaries. They get paid based on sort of the work that they do and all that. But Ruben has another really interesting question. I'm very interested in this one. So if we need to create 45 million jobs in these areas by 2030, so where is that going to come from? Like, what are the areas where you have this kind of massive job creation opportunity? Does either one of you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's very difficult. I'll begin perhaps and hand over to Shrestha. So the way we looked at this was that we really see that the micro, small and medium enterprises are a real engine of job creation in these states. But we also need to have the pool of new industries, of new sectors, of new export markets that then create the demand that MSMEs can fulfill. So you can't really have job creation without economic growth. So it's difficult to say which sector this would be. I think I would hand over now to Shrestha to talk more about perhaps the in-district job opportunities you briefly mentioned in your presentation, Shrestha.
Yeah, I mean, I believe this is an economist's answer, but whatever I can say is, yeah, it's a difficult question to absorb all this workforce, and the broad and safe answer would be to think of, that's the reason we need an economic diversification plan, and some of the states, and I'm talking of one particular states that I recently reviewed, of Jharkhand. Their industrial policy until now, for the last 5 years, has been extremely dependent on around the heavy industries, in fact. And the state is currently redrafting its industrial policy, which is more on based on the primary sector, and the primary sector has to improve. One of mining is also a primary sector, but other than that also, as I was saying, that we need the agricultural base. We need, and if particularly when we think of climate change, we really need to have a resilient economy. We cannot have an economy which is so prone to disruption. And India is a problem because we have a huge amount of population. So we will need to, I personally think that going ahead, we should start about strategizing about these issues also, which is not the part, but this is one of the ways we can certainly talk of. But yeah, there is no clear answer where this 45,000, this huge amount of people will go. Yeah.
Wonderful. Next question, very interesting, from Yuchir Kim, and this is asking about the politics. Sort of, is the current ruling party BJP powerful in these states? I'm a political scientist, so I'm going to take the opportunity to answer this question. And the answer is actually no. So if you look at some of these main states, Odisha, Jharkhand, West Bengal, you see that the chief ministers currently are not from BJP. They are from regional parties or Congress alliances. And this is actually going to be a really important issue moving forward, because in the Indian federal system, if you want to make these intermittent renewables, electricity and solar work, you have to find ways to sort of transmit it where they are needed in the system at different times. So the fact that you have different states with different incentives and often different political alignments is going to be, I think, a serious problem. We are working on this right now. So ISEP has a program that looks at the kind of consequences of state-by-state competition on these issues. So thank you for this question, Yuchir. Next, I have Deepak Krishnan, who is asking specifically to Shrestha. So what do you think about the kind of government officials, local and state level, in these states where you've done extensive work? Are they aware of these issues? Are they discussing developing alternatives in these states?
No, alternatives in terms of livelihood, Jonas?
It doesn't say, but yes. So for example, agriculture, yes, in terms of livelihood.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I mean, the discussion, so there are two levels. Particularly, the state is very influential in deciding the focus. And the interaction with government officials is, yes, they are thinking, as I just said, that in Jharkhand there is a clear focus on, and I hope that policy comes up. I'm sorry, I think the screen just went off. So, so what happened in Jharkhand is they are thinking of a policy where they are trying to focus on agriculture. But there is in Chhattisgarh, the government which took office at the end of 2018, and as Jonas played out the state politics, so they, after taking office, had put a lot of emphasis on forest-based livelihoods, and they started actually settling a lot of the forest rights that has been pending. So yes, there is push in different governments. In Odisha, in the other hand, there is also a lot of interest in mining, but I feel that what the problem with the governments also is at times is what we are saying is that there is a huge pressure of economic growth, and in the federal system in India, of course, is not completely, states do not have the completely decision making power about everything, about many of the policies. So, so yes, in these states there is, but in some of the states they're very industry driven, such as if we talk of Telangana. It's a coal mining state, but is really not looking at much livelihood diversification in these areas.
Okay, so we have more questions than minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to keep your answers super short. The first one is, so Sarang Shidore is asking about, to settle specifically, the calculation of the renewable energy subsidy. So how is that calculated?
Yeah, these come from an excellent report by the ISEP, the Global Subsidies Initiative, and the CEW. So I would encourage you, Sarang, to have a look at this report. It's called Mapping India's Energy Subsidies 2020.
Perfect. That was a short answer. Excellent. And next we have Liz Chatterjee, who's asking about the resource curse. So if you think of the politics, sort of like these different political mafias, big energy firms, India's dependence on money is very important in campaigning. What is the political path to a more sustainable future? Any thoughts on what would need to be done to sort of bring these sustainability concerns to the forefront in elections and less emphasis on rent seeking in natural resources? Any thoughts on that?
So basically, I'm not sure if I understood it right, Jonas, but I'm responding. So yeah, the resource curse, what can be the political move, right? That's what the question was?
Yes, so what is the political path to a more sustainable future? How do we get around these groups that are lobbying again?
Yeah. So, so this is a difficult question. I mean, but the problem is that I feel that the political will should come through some sort of consensus between the center and the state to diversify this economy, or to do away with, to address the situation of the resource curse. Because as I said, that states have certain power in their hand, but at the same time, they are also dependent on center for a lot of fund flow. And political will is also dependent on the resources, on the money. And so that is one of the thing. And one of the classic examples where what is impending, I mean, is or roadblock to moving towards sustainability is the contention that has gone in Jharkhand and between the center, is that the center wants to open up coal blocks, but Jharkhand is taking them to courts. So basically, the states and the center has to sit and just like really get on board on this. So the political will, and with the current situation, there is diversity of opinion around this. And I feel sometimes, like a COVID-like situation, crisis can precipitate a political will and lead to more sustainable investments, which we can only hope.
Interesting question from Lakshmi Deep G, who's asking about, has there been a kind of comparison of coal mining areas to otherwise similar areas to kind of understand like what is really the impact of coal mining on livelihood, socioeconomic development? Does either one of you have any thoughts on this one?
coal mining versus non-coal mining areas?
Yes. So like, what is the impact of coal mining on socioeconomic development? Is there any study that looks at that?
A study in that sense, I mean, there are many studies actually. There is which says that how the coal has changed the socio-economic fabric of this coal mining areas. And of course, I mean, coal mining has gone in India as there is for now 250 years. We have a history. So it has shaped the economy in a way. It has changed livelihood patterns. I mean, one of the most fundamental understanding of a coal region is that the coal mining jobs are there, the formal or the informal, but the entire dependence of the psyche of, I would say, of the general population, because shops have grown around coal mining, restaurants have grown around, businesses have grown around. So yes, coal mining has a huge bearing on the economy of these regions as opposed to non-coal mining areas, definitely.
So I shared in the chat window a few links to a few studies that I'm aware of.
And there's a fantastic book called Coal Nation, which many people contributed to, which gives a long history of coal mining and how economies of these regions have been shaped. And there are many more. Actually, Rahul did a book on coal too. So there are many books, yeah.
Okay, so we are approaching the end of our time. Unfortunately, we did not get through all of this. I think is a reflection of the great interest in this topic, and we've had a very good discussion today. So again, I would like to thank Shrestha and Setu for excellent presentation and taking all these difficult questions. That's a job well done. Thank you for the audience again for joining us today. Really great to have all of you with your questions and comments. Do keep in touch. Again, you can follow us on our website, size-ISEP, and feel free to connect with us. You have the contact information on the slides. So please do come to us with any follow-up questions. And if you're interested in kind of working with us, partnering with us, you are active in this area, we would certainly welcome to hear from you and work with you on this important issue. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night or day, depending on where you are.